Hi, I'm Steve Morgan, founder of Cybersecurity Ventures and editor-in-chief at Cybercrime magazine. I'm here today with Gordon Lawson, CEO at NetAbstraction, developer of a patented cloud-based service that proactively prevents cyber attacks by disguising and varying your network pathways. To learn more about our sponsor, NetAbstraction, visit netabstraction.com. Also joining us is retired Admiral Michael Rogers, former head of the U.S. Cyber Command and director of the National Security Agency, who has been appointed chairman of NetAbstraction's board of advisors. Admiral Rogers, Gordon, welcome. Thank you both for joining us today.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks, Steve.
So, Admiral Rogers, to start off, I'd like to share a little of your background. You're a former U.S. Navy admiral. You served as the second commander of the U.S. Cyber Command. You also served as director of the National Security Agency and as chief of the Central Security Service. Previously, you were commander of the 10th Fleet and commander of the U.S. Fleet Cyber Command. And you were with the DoD, where you bolstered their cyberspace capabilities and expertise. I know I left out a lot. You've got a long background, and gosh, doesn't make me look so good. I've been in the industry for a while, but our team here was very excited to have you on with us today. We have so many listeners, though, who would really like to know some more about your background, and maybe you could take us back to your earliest exposure to technology and cybersecurity.
So I always tell people, look, the most important thing in life is to find something you really love. And I'm very fortunate. I had a dream as a little boy, literally when I was in 6th grade. I told my parents, I'm going to go to the Naval Academy, I'm going to drive ships for a living, and I'm going to be in the Navy. Now, I got 2 out of the 3. I tried to get to the Naval Academy and I failed miserably because my grades were not great. But, my journey was, I just had a dream, all because I read stories of the sea. I didn't come from a military family. I grew up in Chicago, a long way from the ocean. I then, joined the Navy, became commissioned. I was an ROTC, Vice Naval Academy source. One not necessarily better than the other, just different. And one of the things I found, look, like most career fields increasingly in life, technology just was a fundamental basis upon much of the capabilities that we used in the Navy were built on. Didn't matter if it was advanced radar systems, sonars, weapon systems, sensor technology, how you used information, how you built a complete picture, if you will, about what was happening around you. I just found increasingly you had to be comfortable with technology. I didn't have formal technical education. I'm a business undergrad and a political science master's, but I just enjoyed it. I really thought this is interesting the way you apply it. And then as I started a very traditional career as a ship driver, did that for about 6 years. And technology is a very important part of that, all those weapon systems and sensors. So I went into this very specialized field of intelligence known in the Navy as cryptology, but the broader world uses the phrase signals intelligence. And what happened was, in the past, traditionally, when I first joined the Navy in 1981, look, the military used their networks and the commercial world or the private sector used its own networks. What happened over time is increasingly governments, militaries, security structures, they morphed from their own systems into using commercial. They use commercial hardware, they use commercial software. So increasingly, I found myself understanding commercial structures. And then the last thing is around the turn of the century, so 2000, or the late 1990s, you saw communication systems around the world shifting to internet protocol-based systems, as opposed to RF, radio frequency, microwave, etc. And so increasingly, I found myself, if you want to understand enemy communications, you got to understand networks. You got to understand how internet protocols, how transmission control protocols work. And then finally, as that world got me in a network, suddenly cybersecurity became very important. So I basically spent in particular, I did 37 years in uniform. They ultimately made me a 4-star. I was very fortunate. But the last 15 years were very much focused in particular on cybersecurity and cyber offense. I enjoyed the fact that I both penetrated networks for a living, so to speak, as well as defended them.
Right. So you had a chance to do what many in the private sector do not.
Yes. Well, at least legally.
Right. So, Gordon, I have to ask, when did Admiral Rogers get involved with NetAbstraction?
Oh no, great question, Steve. Well, first of all, we're super honored that Mike has joined our advisory board as chairman. And I will say it's been about 6-7 months now, but I will say we have a couple similarities. I did go to the Naval Academy, but I certainly did not go nearly as far in the Navy as the Admiral did. And it is it's an honor for me to even be able to call this gentleman by his first name. That my training as a naval officer, we never did that. But we're in different roles now in the private sector, and it really just really amazing to have his insight advising us at NetAbstraction and helping us to really design products and services that I think can really transform and help companies around the world.
Right. So, Admiral Rogers, to say that our country is facing cyber threats would be an understatement.
Yeah.
Put it in context for us. I mean, the threat to our country, how serious is it? We read about ransomware, we read about the cyber attacks. I don't think that the everyday person, I don't think that most CISOs, frankly, understand just how grave the threat is.
Yeah, so I think part of the challenge is scale. You have so many different actors now, whether they be nation states, criminal groups, individuals. You have so many actors out there who are involved in trying to penetrate systems for different purposes. So number one, scale, I would argue, has really changed. If you went back 20, 30 years ago, when you really first saw entities penetrating cyber networks for different purposes, relatively small in scale and very focused. And when I say focused, nation states are very much focused on how you extract information that's of value from a national security perspective. Think about espionage, spying. Over time, nation states not only did that, but now nation states have developed capabilities that are designed to place key infrastructure, key connectivity at risk so they can disable it, they can degrade it. That has expanded, and what started as first a few nations having these kinds of capabilities, you now have a huge number of nations that have these capabilities. But probably the biggest change has been outside the government structure in the form of criminal actors who increasingly viewed the ability to access and penetrate networks as a vehicle to generate revenue.
Mm-hmm.
They were incentivized to use cyber capabilities illegally for the purposes of either extracting or holding at risk data, network capability, operating infrastructure within a company's network. They were able to place that all at risk, and people then were willing to pay to remove that risk. And so I think you've had several things come together at the same time, which also argues I don't see it getting better in the near term. I don't see this as, well, don't worry, this is a short-term problem, and over the course of the next year or so, things are going to get better for us. I doubt that's the way this thing will play out.
Right. So, Gordon, Admiral Rogers talks about generating revenue. Let's face it, cyber criminals are selfish. There's nothing good about them. They're out to, cause harm. So let's narrow the conversation a little bit to ransomware. It is the fastest growing type of cybercrime. Put it in context for us. How much of a focus is that for NetAbstraction, and how serious do you see ransomware as a threat to our country and our companies?
Well, it's certainly a huge threat. I think one of the metrics that I have heard recently as we work closely with many insurance companies around the country and around the world is right now they're expected to pay out, I think, close to $700 million on those cyber insurance policies. And those are just the reported numbers. There's probably a lot of that that's not reported. For all of 2020, they paid out about $450 million. So the threat is increasing, the consequences are increasing. And frankly, these companies have to have business continuity. And I think the big threat with ransomware is it is affecting that continuity. It's affecting their ability to provide services like Colonial Pipeline, as we saw, fundamentally transforming and affecting the way of life of our citizens. And so the implications of this are quite severe. In terms of how NetAbstraction is trying to help with this problem, there's a couple ways, and there's lots of great technical controls out there, but I think that there's one thing that I want to focus on. the majority of this ransomware is delivered via email, typically in a browsing session. And while it does affect very large companies, it's also affecting, we'll say, that unfortunate 5,000, right? There's the Fortune 500, and there's the unfortunate 5,000. Maybe we'll call that the unfortunate 50,000. Companies that don't have millions and millions of dollars to dedicate to their cybersecurity controls. So if those employees are in a browsing session, in an email session, and they are open to the internet, they're open to malicious links, that's a problem. And so I think browser isolation technology is something that we do. It's something that has been typically maybe too expensive for a lot of these companies in the past, but it's something that we have really transformed through our patented network. I think that is one point where we can really help that employee to be defended against a threat, a very pervasive threat. And it's just something that we have to continue to evolve. And it's not just an abstraction, it's the whole community here implementing good, cost-effective controls that can really help us to defend against this evolving wave that we're seeing with ransomware.
So, Admiral Rogers, how do we deal with nation-state sponsored criminal actors who perpetuate ransomware? We know who some of them are. We don't know who many of them are. So we're talking about a range of actors from North Korea, from Iran, from Russia, from China. The list goes on. What do we do? And I ask you that as a media property who covers this on a daily basis, and we put out a lot of reports, not just about payouts, as Gordon spoke to, but a lot of damage costs that aren't calculated that really cause a lot of harm. What does our country do?
So first of all, like many challenges in life, there's no one single answer here. I wish I could tell you, hey, if you did this one thing, we're going to do away with this problem. I don't see it playing out like that. So I think there's multiple components to this, and I think there's multiple actors that need to be involved, whether that be private businesses, whether that be friendly governments, whether that be bringing pressure to bear on governments that are providing protection or shielding some of these groups. For example, if you look at the single greatest concentration of cyber criminal actors are found in Russia or Eastern Europe.
Right.
Why? Because they believe that governments in Russia and Eastern Europe are either ineffective in attempting to stop them, or quite frankly, in some cases, we have argued, the US has argued in Russia at least, and look, the government gives them some measure of sanctuary. So I always reminded people, look, it's not by chance that you find the actors in these places. They go where they think they're the safest. They go where they think they got the highest probability of not being apprehended, of not being forestalled. So I think there's a government dimension to this, but I would argue the most important thing in some ways is, so what are we doing as individual companies, as individual firms, as individuals ourselves in our own lives to make the job harder for these criminals? Because I wish I could tell you, don't worry, we're going to do away with cyber criminals and we're never going to have to deal with it's ransomware right now, it'll be other things over time. I wish I could say cyber criminals are going to go away. As long as there's money to be made, I don't think that is the most likely. And therefore, I think we've all got to acknowledge that, look, there is a level of responsibility here at a company and an individual level. So making life harder, making it tougher for these individuals to succeed. Quite frankly, it's what attracted me to NetAbstraction, because I like the idea of net obfuscation as part of a defense strategy, as part of a security strategy. If I can shield identity, if I can shield location, it makes life harder for the actor. And in my previous life as a director of the National Security Agency, we spent a lot of time figuring, how do we shield identity? Because we know we're a target. We know hackers all over the world. We know nation states want to go after our data. What are some of the tools that we can use? For example, in my previous life, what were some of the tools that we could use? And I thought net obfuscation was an important set of capabilities that I really liked. This is one of the reasons why I wound up with Gordon and the team. I just believed in the mission and the capability and said, hey, this is something that I think it won't solve world hunger. I wish I could tell you that, but I think this can really make a difference in cybersecurity. And we can do this for the small and the mid-sized firms. Because quite frankly, again, in my previous life in the government, I used to deal with companies around the United States and across the world on cybersecurity issues. And I used to kid, for example, the financial sector, when I would be in New York dealing with some of the largest financial institutions or banks in the world. I would kid their CEOs about, look, the average company doesn't have $500 million to spend on a baseline cybersecurity budget.
Right.
I wish they did, but it's not reality. So we've got to come up with solutions that scale to organizations with access to less money, access to less expertise, have fewer people focused on cybersecurity. That's the only way you're going to make this work. If every company has to spend these massive amounts of money and dedicate these massive numbers of people, I don't think this works out.
So looking at the two of you together, this is promising, and we're seeing a lot more of this. Yeah, I'm sure you follow CISA and what they're doing. In general, Admiral Rogers, are we moving in the right direction? Are we seeing more partnership between government and private sector?
So broadly, I'd say, yes, we are moving in the right direction, because the first and most important step to me was we are acknowledging the problem. When I was in government, I always used to tell our nation's leadership, sir, if we don't acknowledge we got a problem, we can't fix anything. We've got to acknowledge there's an issue here, and we've got to acknowledge the scale, and we have to acknowledge that not one single entity alone can fix this. So this is about how you bring a team together. So that's a positive. The downside, and what frustrates me a little, is we're still not where we need to be in terms of the government and the private sector working together in an integrated way 24/7. Because when the focus is cooperation is great after the event, that always puts you behind the power curve.
Right.
It's a resource intensive way to do business.
So how do we get there? What do we need to do? I mean, we're receptive. We want to amplify your message. What is it that we should be doing?
So number one, I think we want to incentivize businesses and the government to partner. So for example, a lot of times companies will say, well, look, I have liability concerns, or if I partner with the government, I'm going to open myself up to some liability challenges from a business perspective. I'm not sure that's the best thing for me. So how can we take away some of those liability concerns? How can we incentivize? Are there legal frameworks, for example? Because remember, only the government can create laws and generate policy that goes across not just individual sectors, but broadly across nation states and the private sector. What incentives, what legal frameworks can the government develop that might help people? For example, one of the biggest challenges we run into right now, most companies will not publicly acknowledge that they've been penetrated.
Right.
When I was in government, I used to argue, look, we want the pain of one to lead to the benefit of many. But when the one in pain refuses to acknowledge that something has happened, doesn't share the nature of the attack, doesn't share the nature of the activities the actor used, their capabilities, the vulnerabilities they exploited, we just relearn the same lessons over and over again. There's a reason why criminals are able to exploit the same vulnerabilities over and over again. That's not good for us.
Right. Well, to hear that from somebody with your stature, I appreciate it, because I don't know that a lot of people, whether it's in government or the private sector, are willing to say that. And I think you're absolutely right. So, Gordon, Admiral Rogers alluded to NetAbstraction and what you're doing, but give us a 30,000-foot view. Just tell us a little bit about NetAbstraction.
Yeah, absolutely, Steve. Well, I think the high-level piece that's I think differentiates us is we have a patented software-defined network, and we can apply those principles of obfuscation in a couple different ways. I already talked about browser isolation. It's a product we have called NetAccess that was designed for the government for OSINT type work, right, where you have misattribution, and the government still uses that product. But what we've done is we've taken that and we've made some modifications to it, and we can apply that browser isolation technology to any company in any allied country around the world, so that their employees can be protected, and basically whenever they're in an internet session, it's a containerized VM. If they click on something that's bad, it's going to spin down in the cloud, and it's not going to affect their machine or the network. So that's one, I think, really interesting way that we've applied those defense and intelligence roots that NetAbstraction has to help a broader audience. The other piece that we could use that software-defined network to really transform is the migration to the cloud. So we help our clients provision cloud infrastructure in an obfuscated manner. That means that we can obscure not only the digital trail with when data is moving to the cloud, but also the billing trail behind that. And that is some tradecraft that comes out of our government roots that, once again, we can help companies to make sure that their crown jewels, when they're stored in a Oracle, Amazon, Google, Microsoft environment, it doesn't matter, we're cloud agnostic, and we can move that data for them as well. But it gives confidence to those companies that their data will remain secure, because that's another vector, speaking of ransomware, where backups get locked up. And if it's harder for a threat actor to know where that data is, because it's not attributable back to the end organization or to NetAbstraction, there's a lot of tactical advantages that we can provide. So high-level browser isolation and cloud obfuscation, all with a patented network. That's our bread and butter.
So Admiral Rogers, it may sound like there's some humor here, but I'm being dead serious. How do you recruit an admiral? And what I mean by that seriously is, there's thousands of startups. I mean, there are companies with great technology out there who, are trying to get on the radar screen, and they don't know Admiral Rogers, that they don't have contacts at that level. How can they reach out, not necessarily to you, but to the right people with background in government who can help them, partner with them?
Right. So look, for me, my connection with NetAbstraction started largely because when NetAbstraction went to the A round for investment, I had been working with one of the investors, doing some other things. So one thing I remind, particularly startups, as you're trying to create, one of the things to do is, as you are gaining funding, talk to your investors about, hey, look, are there people that that you work with that we could access now that you've made an investment in us, that we could potentially work with, who could bring insight and knowledge to us? That's how I initially became aware of NetAbstraction. And then I met with Gordon, and that's the next dimension. Never forget the human piece in this. Because I like spending time on organizations that are focused on problem sets that I think are relevant, that have solutions that I think are widely applicable and that I believe in, and then quite frankly are led and teamed with people who I want to spend time with. So the other thing I always try to remind companies as you're looking for expertise is open yourself up from a human side. Let people know who you are, what you value, the kind of people, your leadership team, your engineering team, because good people attract other people.
Right.
Nobody wants to be involved with an organization they don't believe in, or they don't want to spend any time with the people.
Right. So, Admiral Rogers, before we let you go, we have a large audience, and it ranges from CISOs to a lot of young people and parents and educators. You had a moment before we got started to say hello to, one young person. So, do you have a message for high school students, for, young people in college who might be thinking about cyber, but it's not clear to them, what that path might lead to?
Jack, so first thing I always try to tell people is, look, find something that gives you a sense of purpose, a sense of fulfillment, something that you think you can make a difference in, regardless of what the field is. I always told my sons, I hope for you what your father had. Your father had a dream as a little boy, and he was able to take the dream and live it. And the reality was even better than the dream I had. I would wish that for you kids, for my sons. I said, look, that's what I hope you find in life. A passion that you just really, really love. For those who are contemplating cybersecurity potentially, or cyber in the network world in general, look, the field needs all the motivated people that it can get.
Right.
The reality is there is more work, there's more opportunity there than there are people, and that is not likely to change. I suspect we're going to have a mismatch between requirements and the amount of human capital we really have. I don't see that going away anytime soon. So there's plenty of opportunity out there. So I would encourage people, look, there's a great field out there, and it's not a cookie cutter field. Not everybody has to have an undergraduate degree in computer science. Not everybody has to have a master's level education. Look, as I said previously, I have a business undergrad and a political science master's. When I was trying to recruit people within the Navy to go into the cybersecurity arena, what I used to remind them is, look, I don't need everybody to be a cybersecurity engineer. What I do need is people who are comfortable with applying technology against technically focused problem sets, who can work together as a team and who want to make a difference. So if you can do those three things, we got work for you.
Right.
And I think that's true, whatever business whether you're in the private sector, whether you're in government. And so for young adults out there, there's just lots of opportunities. And my last point is, and it doesn't just have to be young adults. Some of the best cybersecurity professionals I ever worked with when I was in the government, they were not young kids just starting their journey coming out of college. Many of them had been doing other things and got into the field, and they brought a whole different set of experiences, a whole different set of perspectives that really were of value. So there's no cookie cutter here. Not everybody is going to be the same, which is good. I think that's a source of strength for cybersecurity personally.
Well, we have about 500,000 openings right now in cyber in the United States, and many more globally. So for anyone who's listening, look us up online, cybersecurityventures.com. We publish a lot of data around employment in our field. Gentlemen, I'd like to thank both of you for joining us today, and I hope you'll both come back on with us soon.
Thank you, Steve. And Gordon, it's always a pleasure to spend time with you.
Yes, sir. Always a pleasure. Steve, if you don't mind, just one more comment on the recruiting. And the Admiral and I are both obviously veterans, and that's something that I think you asked about companies and how do you recruit an Admiral? Well, that may be a little challenging sometimes, but you know what? There's lots of folks, really smart folks getting out of all of our branches now in cyber who are looking for positions. It's one of the reasons we, NetAbstraction, we opened an office in Augusta, Georgia, and we're doing this great event in March with Mike and some other folks on a panel. But I encourage all of your listeners out there, please look at that veteran community. That is an amazing source of talent. We are in a war, and there's no better place than to bring those warriors into the private sector when they're done with their service and to really combat this threat. And it's super exciting to see them come into companies and just do so well and really help everyone excel.
Absolutely.
Amen, Gordon.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thank you for that, Gordon. And again, hope to see the two of you back on soon. Happy New Year.
Thanks very much.
Thanks so much. Thanks.
Stay healthy, everybody. Stay safe.
I'm Steve Morgan, founder of Cybersecurity Ventures and editor-in-chief at Cybercrime magazine. Joining us today was Gordon Lawson, CEO at NetAbstraction, developer of a patented cloud-based service that proactively prevents cyber attacks by disguising and varying your network pathways. Also joining us was retired Admiral Michael Rogers, former head of the U.S. Cyber Command and director of the National Security Agency, who has been appointed chairman of NetAbstraction's Board of Advisors. To learn more about our sponsor NetAbstraction, visit netabstraction.com. You can keep up with all of our media at cybercrimemagazine.com.